And welcome to the Tuesday, October 29th, 2019 Shelburne Selectboard meeting, which I now call to order. The first item is to approve the agenda. I'm recommending one change to the agenda, and that is to add an executive session, which we'll itemize as 9B. And that regards potential litigation. In this case, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Jamie, moved by Mary. Mike is recusing. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Colleen is opposed. Mary, Jerry, and Jamie voted aye, and Colleen voted nay. The next item is to approve Select Board meeting minutes, first of September 24th. The three of you who would be approving those are Jamie, Mike, and Mary.
Move to approve the Shelburne Select Board meeting minutes of September 24th, 2019.
Jamie moves approval.
I'll second.
Mike seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay.
Abstain.
Two of us abstain for reasons of not having been there. The next set of minutes are October 15th. I do have several comments to make, Lee. First of all, Roland's name is spelled differently in several places, but I'm pretty sure it's R-O-L-A-N-D. So we'll need to check that all the way through. As well, on page 3, under 9, at the next to last sentence, that's one of the occasions. And there is in here, while Colleen might welcome the opportunity to be able to draw down funds from the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, I don't think that's what we intended. So instead of Colleen Parker, that ought to be Colleen Haig.
The second one.
That's 17.
I had a couple things on the name changes in section 9, page 3. Noah Dater, D-A-T-E-R, was the resident. Back on the form-based zoning update in section 8, I'm not sure, we can check the record, I'm not sure this is what was said, that the application was on its way to approval. I didn't really like suggesting that the outcome was already determined, but I would just ask that someone check that. If it was said, it was said by staff.
That was a little more decisive. I think the commentary ran to the effect that the application was in process.
Right.
Now, this is more of a commitment than I'm sure was made, and I agree with that change.
And then in section 9, midway through that first paragraph, I don't think this is a true statement. Residents were not notified of the meeting on the sewer reroute. I believe there were a couple adjacent parcels within the neighborhood who were notified in connection with the DRB application. That's my understanding of. I would just make sure we check
Right.
I don't want this to sort of reflect the factual record. I'm fine with residents making statements. But up here, it seems to be making statements that I'm not 100% sure are accurate. So I would just
We'll double check.
ask that we double check that.
Well, this is a record of what a petitioner said, no, not whether we would happen to agree with it or find it accurate. And in this case, I'm not so sure I agree, Jamie.
I'm okay with that. If it's clear that
That's
this is
Tony's
Tony's.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, it may be
These are all
helpful.
Tony-
Tony's
on a new
statements.
paragraph.
These are all Tarn's statements. These
yeah.
are all Noah's. That's
It
fine.
may be helpful just simply to say,
yeah.
Tony noted that residents were not notified,
Yes.
or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a
Maybe it
number
just
of
needs to be a new paragraph.
corrections. Mike, any further?
Clarify that.
I have nothing to say about this topic.
Mary?
No, I was not at the meeting, so unfortunately.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay. All right,
So
given
move
that,
to approve the minutes of October 15th, 2019.
Colleen moves,
Second.
Jamie seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay.
I abstain.
Mary abstains for reason of not having attended the meeting. The next item are public comments. Hearing none, seeing no hands, the following item are select board comments. I'll lead. It's really to piggyback on a commendation that Lee eloquently placed in Front Porch Forum, and that is to thank the many, many people in various committees and town services and departments who made Halloween celebration Sunday possible. Not only the parade, but the various festivities. It was my pleasure to help as well, and it's a really one-off kind of experience to see dozens of helpers, including virtually the entire rec committee, I'm sure, taking down everything, putting it away, spending a good deal of their Sunday afternoon in service to the town and to benefit a lot of kids who had a really good time. So we can't thank all of you enough who were involved. Mike?
I have a story to tell. I was driving on Irish Hill Road from Spear Street to Marset. Coming down the hill, I was being tailgated. I'm very conscious about going the speed limit through the town center. I very patiently made my way to the stop sign at Marset, where the person zipped out from behind me and blew through the stop sign and then made their way up the hill. Now I know that's anecdotal, and I'm just saying it was kind of interesting to see that firsthand. I'm sure it's happening all over town, but people have been talking about the stop sign at Marset. So just thought that was interesting. So anyway, little anecdotal story.
Well, thank you.
My
No, it's
pleasure.
important to keep us, for us to keep track.
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
it happens. It happens more often than is safe, and it happens more often than it should. You know.
Yeah.
Mary?
It wasn't me.
She was already in her chair.
Nothing else to add, thanks.
Nothing. Colleen?
It wasn't me either. It wasn't Jamie. All right, that's 4 out of the town.
Right.
No, nothing else other than, Thursday's Halloween, and we're excited, and kids are excited. They have 4 costumes each picked out, and they have wardrobe changes at each corner, and that's about it.
Keep an eye out on the roads, on the streets. Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Plus, it's going to be raining, I think, so it makes it harder.
Yes.
So nobody will see any of those costumes
Yeah.
at all. They'll be undercoats.
Jamie?
I would echo your sentiments on Halloween. We were at the parade with the kids, and it was great. I mean, the weather was not terrific, but great turnout all around, and fire rescue, Rotary. Saw Diane out there. It was good turnout.
It's just quite a testimony to the degree to which all of our fellow residents serve, and happily, and to the benefit of everybody, but especially to the kids on a day like that. It was really something. So we thank you. The next item is the town manager report.
Thank you. Back in the saddle and full speed ahead. I'd like to speak to one main topic this evening, and that is the Stormwater Ordinance. As you know, we held public hearings here last year after significant efforts by the Stormwater Advisory Committee to prepare an ordinance and a credit manual to help get that work moving. We ran into some issues at the public hearing process. The Selectboard chose not to adopt the ordinance at that time, sent it back to the Stormwater Advisory Committee for further work. We've been working diligently on that through the course of this calendar year, and we have come up with a revised ordinance and credit manual that there is unanimous support for on the committee. And I'd like to run through briefly some of the changes and updates that we're proposing and hope to bring to a public hearing shortly.
Oh, thank you, Lee.
Go here and here. So again, as you know, we worked on this hard through the year at your request. We are hoping to bring this back to a public hearing process later this fall or very early winter with a hope for adoption and effective date of July 1, 2020 to fit into the fiscal year and the new budget. There are two main categories of land use, as you may recall, single-family residential and everything else, which in the parlance of stormwater is considered non-single-family residential. Originally, residential properties would have been assessed equally across the board, no matter their size, no matter the amount of impervious area. After consideration, the suggestion is to create a two-tiered approach, which tries to build a little more equity into the system. So for properties that have less than 1 acre of impervious would be assessed a certain fee, and those with 1 acre or more would be assessed a higher fee. It creates a process that adds some equity. It's never going to be perfect, and a reasonable amount of administrative efficiency. The more you divvy these up, I mean, most of the properties in Shelburne, as you know, are residential. So the more tiers or separation we create between types of properties, the more complicated it gets in a big hurry for very minimal changes in outcomes financially for either homeowners or the town. Non-single-family properties, non-single-family residential properties, which is everything else, commercial, industrial, office, or multi-family housing, would be assessed on either actual or best estimates of impervious area. So theirs is specifically calculated based on actual numbers. Another key proposed change here is phasing in the stormwater utility fees over a 3-year period, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. And there were several reasons that this is proposed. One is that we want to help people get used to the new financial impacts of these fees. Secondly, in some cases, especially on the non-single-family residential properties, landowners may be spending a fair amount of money to hire engineers and do the analyses needed to earn the credits under the companion credit manual. So if we come in with the full utility fee on one hand and they're having to spend significant dollars on the other hand to earn credits that won't apply immediately, we're kind of hitting people hard twice. So the thought was ramp this up over a 3-year period and hope that that eases everybody into the whole process.
So the ramp up's for everybody, not just non-single family?
Correct.
Okay.
Would be for everyone. And let's get to the next slide. And then on the other side of the coin, if you will, as you know, there was also a credit manual that accompanied the ordinance, and there are various categories or ways that property owners can earn credits that offset their fees under the system. Some of these fees require, again, significant engineering analysis. Others might be just virtually by way of actual practices on the land. And as you recall, several of the largest landowners that happen to be nonprofits last year had significant concerns about the fiscal impacts on their programs and budgets. So the proposal here is to increase the education credit that could be earned from 10% to 20%, and increase the agriculture credit from 25% to 45%. And that was a way to try to meet people halfway. We couldn't just create a separate category of nonprofits. There's no legal basis to do that. But again, trying to find the best balance between everybody, because the premise of this is an all-in program that all landowners, residential, non-residential, or nonprofit. The total maximum credit is proposed to increase from 70 to 75%. Whether anyone can actually earn that, of course, will remain to be seen, but at least it offers greater opportunities if a landowner can take advantage of those. As far as budget implications, and these are all round numbers for simplicity this evening, currently in this year's general fund, we've allocated $206,000 on the tax rate, if you will, from property taxpayers. We're proposing that that would remain the same for next year, plus there's an additional $25,000 proposed in the draft capital improvement plan that you have for a specific purpose. So that would raise on taxes, if this is accepted, $231,000. The utility fees are estimated to raise an additional $170,000 on their own, again, at that 33% year one phase in. So if this all played out in the overall budget process, the total stormwater budget for next fiscal year would be just over $400,000. So it's an increase of roughly that 170 plus the 25 for a phosphorus control plan. Chris Robinson has proposed a $250,000 project specifically in Boulder Hill. He believes that in this round number estimate, rough cut, that would be a feasible project given grants that he hopes to acquire for that project and then the utility fees. So over time, as the stormwater fees ramp up, the percentage based on property taxes themselves should decrease as we phase this in over a 3-year program. So that's the short story of where we landed as a committee. There was a lot of give and take, a lot of extended conversation about what's right, what's best, and trying to find the best balance of competing needs and interests.
So how does the ramp down from the general fund allocation work? Just the same
So for example,
methodology?
next year, if this phased approach is accepted, so next year we're proposing 170 from the fees. The following year it would be twice that, or 340,000 net any credits that might earn. So hypothetically, we can start taking some significant dollars out of the general fund contribution, whether it's a straight 170 trade-off or we phase down the general fund contribution to keep
And
stormwater projects
that's
moving.
something we would just look at annually, right?
But
in
I
the budget
imagine it
process.
would be a
Okay.
fairly helpful and significant decrease on the
Right.
general fund.
Lee, I'm a little behind the curve here. Credits are credits for what?
Good question. Those are credits against the fees that would otherwise be assessed on an individual property. So if hypothetically, we'll use a live example. John DeBrule was part of the overall conversation. At the Automaster, he did a fairly recent expansion of his property, and he had to meet stormwater regs under the state rules for stormwater detention and water quality treatment. So with the same engineering analysis and work he had already done, he could submit that to say, hey, I shouldn't have to pay the full fee. I'm already treating my stormwater on site with the most current practices, so I should be able to earn a water quality credit against the fee I would
But
otherwise
is it a
pay.
dollar for dollar credit?
The
or it's
credits, well, just to use again round numbers, if my property had a $100 stormwater fee assessed on it, and as an education credit, I could prove that I'm teaching people about stormwater treatment, I deserve a 20% credit, be 20% of my $100 fee, or then I would owe 80 instead of the 100. So it's a percentage based on the fee for each property.
And dollar-wise, are we trying to hit a target, or we're just trying to meet certain projects that need to be, does the state mandate a certain amount that we have to generate, or are we trying to meet state-mandated projects?
It's more the latter. There's a series of projects that we as a municipality have to undertake. The stormwater budget that was originally contemplated, if it were a perfect world and you could just wave magic wands, was just over $500,000 a year to accomplish the projects that we need to do over time. So this current proposal wouldn't quite get us there, but it would get us a lot closer than we have been. So it would give us a good start.
There's a trade-off, Lee, obviously, in administering a 3-year phasing. How expensive is the second and third year? How expensive are those 2 years going to be once the program is set up the first year?
Well, you're right. There is a fair bit of ramping up that needs to be done. We need to update the estimates across the board of impervious area on all 2,200 plus parcels in town. And, as Peter knows all too well, adding into the Nemrick utility billing system another process to send out yet another type of bill. So it's a fair bit of ramp up on the front end, whether that needs to happen in-house or we can outsource some of that. We're not the first municipality to run this through the Nemrick system, so I'm hoping there's a template out there that we can adopt and not reinvent this on our own. But the first year, yes, involves a fair bit of administrative back-end work to get the system up and running.
And we'll have a budget figure for that.
Yes.
Do these credits reset each year? I think I remember they do. They have to be recertified. Once you've qualified, once you're eligible for a credit, do you have to come back each year to renew that?
I don't think so, but I'll have to double check. I don't think there's an intent that somebody has to go through that every year, but I'll double check that for you.
Well done.
Is that helpful?
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're confident we have the time to conduct the hearings and everything else?
Yes, Chris Robinson would hope that we could hold a public hearing sooner than the January 21 date you and I had discussed.
Yeah.
I think his concern, quite understandably, is what if we hit a new stumbling block in that process and don't necessarily get it adopted as easily this time around as we might hope.
He'll
But-
just have a very big hole in his budget. That's-
But we know we're up against budget season and everything else, and there's never perfect timing. So the other part of this is whether tonight we might want to actually set that date or hold off till another time.
Yeah. I'd be
My
comfortable
recommendation
sending
would
it
be
at this
that we-
point.
Yeah, I think we're probably all of a mind that we can set the date tonight at your recommendation.
That'd be great, just so there's clarity and process.
Did
You have a want-
date in mind?
Be-
21st of January.
January 21, 2020?
You want a motion to that effect, or will our direction be enough?
Please, motion would be great.
Would someone move establishing that date?
Move to establish the first hearing date for the Stormwater Utility and Credit Manual,
Mary moves.
January 21, 2020.
Second.
Mary moves. Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Any questions from the audience? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Well done.
Jamie, for the
Oh,
suggestion.
thank you. No, it's great. I'm very happy that we have consensus from the advisory committee and good progress all
That's a
around.
good deal
So
of
thank
work.
you.
It
Yeah.
was,
That's a good deal of work. Thank you.
glad to get us there. Help get us there. That's all I plan to speak about.
Okay,
Thank
sir.
you.
The next item are applicants for CBC positions. We have two this evening, one for the Dog Park Committee and one for the Planning Commission. Which would you like to go? I see Jason has arrived, but
I'll see.
Thank you.
where,
You want another one?
were you the Dog Park Committee
No, no,
applicant?
no.
Or?
I see Marissa's here. Yeah.
No, I know, I'm only teasing. I'm only teasing you. Would you, you are Marissa or Marisa? It's Marissa. Parisi, would you like to stand up and take the mic and give the folks at home your name and tell us a little bit about your interest in the Dog Park Committee? And
Certainly. So my name is Marissa Parisi. I live in Shelburne with my husband, Mike. We live on Spear Street. We've lived here for 9 years. We have 2 rescue dogs that are registered in the town of Shelburne that utilize the dog park quite a bit with us. I work in healthcare reform, where I'm actually not working in healthcare. I'm out in the community doing municipal advocacy with a very large statewide team and have never done any municipal position myself. So when the dog park committee was advertised, given that we are active users and I feel like I have some skill set to offer the dog park and that I've done a lot of advocacy, and also I'm learning quite a bit because I've sat in on the meetings, I wanted to offer my service to the town of Shelburne in that role.
good for you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have questions of us?
I do not. I'm just happy to be of service. I have a lot of questions for the dog park committee.
Well, you've given indication that you understand the current situation.
I do, and
terms of-
I've sat in on the last 2 meetings. I also went out as a volunteer, not as an official committee member, to help measure the dog park a couple of weeks ago to compare against the assessment that was was paid for independently. So I'm not an expert at all in Class 2 wetlands, but I'm certainly learning quite a bit, and am happy to do what I can. I am a very good fundraiser and have offered my skills in social media and fundraising at the dog park. Once we get to the place where it's we have the permits in place and it's ready to go to really come back out into the community.
Good, fantastic.
Great.
What's the term?
Would you like to say something in,
3 years.
in support of her?
So till
Yeah,
tonight, till April
As a-
2020.
as a fella? Any questions from any of us?
April.
We're just confirming the term here.
The term is,
April 2022. So move to appoint Marissa Parisi to the Dog Park Committee for a term starting tonight, 3-year term ending April 2022.
Second.
moved by Colleen, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We welcome you.
Thanks, Marissa.
Welcome.
We thank you for your
Municipal
interest.
government.
It'll be great to work with you. Thanks. The other applicant this evening is for the Planning Board, Planning Commission. Does,
The DRB, right?
oh, DRB,
Well, that,
Planning
he
Commission.
did,
No,
he did specify DRB, but he's here, I
Okay,
think, for the planning commission
Says
tonight.
Beautiful.
DRB
Okay.
number 1. so-
yeah.
so since you're responsible for this confusion, Jason, would you like to say a few words in advance, or shall we hear from Mr. Sirah?
I am Jason Grignon. I am chair of the Planning Commission, and we have a candidate who would like the open spot. And that would bring us to full force, which would be fantastic.
Super. Would you like to say a few words to us and let the audience know who you are, so?
Jean Sirois, I'm a Shelburne resident since 2006, U.S. citizen since 2007 with my wife. We've been living here in Shelburne. So I want to get involved a little bit like Marissa. I want to get involved a little bit in how the town works. I contribute, fair share, I guess, through our taxes. And, we want to have a say into what's going on in the town and help, lead the town to continue evolving, in a very good way.
Super. Do you have any questions about what to
No, I've
expect?
attended a meeting already with the Planning Commission as an observer, and so slowly getting into the terminology used and what's the topics that are more in line with I guess their priorities.
We neglected to mention to Marissa, we'll catch up on that, but we have an ethics ordinance, as you may know, in the town, and it's our expectation that you will read that, absorb as much of it as you can first time through, but keep current with it, and should you have any questions, certainly Jason and others on the commission would help you.
Sure. Yep.
Any questions of,
No, thank you for your willingness to serve.
I'm happy to do it.
Can you pronounce your name?
Jean Sirois. Yeah, I'm French Canadian,
Right.
so from Quebec City. Been living in the U.S. since 1997. So 22 years.
So this is a 3-year term?
Yeah,
yes?
So I should have asked Jason or Dean ahead of time. We're filling out someone else's term,
Yes.
and we,
This one, I think, was Dick Elkins, right? Because Andrew Everett was the other spot. I've got the info. We had one spot free. We had 2 open for a while.
Yeah.
And one was filled at your last meeting, and this fills the second one.
Got it, so let's.
yeah, apologize, I should have checked that.
That's fine. He's just going to check the date on the seat. Have you memorized the bylaw yet, or no?
No.
You have time to do that.
Scan to brain.
Jason can step you through that.
Yeah.
Become a year or 2 after that.
Yeah.
So Jean will be filling the seat vacated by Andrew Everett, which would expire in 2021.
April of 2021?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
Sure. Move to appoint Jean Sirois to the Shelburne Planning Commission for a term beginning this evening and ending April 1, 2021.
Jamie moves the appointment.
I'll second.
Mike seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Sean, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're honored to have your
It'll be fun.
involvement.
I'm glad the planning commission will be up to full speed.
Yes.
Thanks, Jason. The next item is the annual report from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, whose executive director, Charlie Baker, is with us and who will make it. Welcome to you, and a year later, thanks ever again for all of your help in making Lee's position here possible.
I think he was doing the hard part, so.
Thanks,
Or
Charlie.
the easy part, I don't know. He got to work with you guys, so. No, thank you for making time on the agenda. I think you got my report in your packet. I'm not going to read that, figuring that you have, but I'll just summarize it real quick. And the purpose of the visit is really, yes, to review the report, but also kind of a customer service call for you. You know, the municipalities make up our board, so we provide services to the municipalities, and so I just like to check in every year and see how we're doing and see, get any feedback, positive or negative. That will help us provide better services going forward. So on the first page of the report is really background on the Regional Planning Commission, who makes up our board, a little bit about how we're funded, and the percentage of municipal dues that make up our funding, which is about 5 or 6%. Your representatives for FY19, which I believe are pretty much the same in FY20. On the second page, we go into specific things that we worked with the town on last year, including getting your comprehensive plan approved, working on quite a bit of GIS mapping work for you, some project management on the sidewalk project, emergency management, municipal roads general permit. So happy to take any feedback on any of those items, or flip to the next page. The next section reviews the handful of projects that you have in our transportation improvement program, which are also in the state's capital program, and a little bit about at least the latest cost and schedule information we had. Yeah, some of these I'm hoping have moved forward now, the ones that say they were planned for construction in 2019. And then the last 2 or 3 pages review kind of a wide variety of things that we do kind of county-wide without regard to any specific municipality, including things like, you know, updating our plan and the Building Homes Together campaign, public health issues, energy planning, clean water work. So happy to take any questions or feedback on any of those items as well. But that is all I have to say.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
I'm the first one to witness my own ignorance,
Sure.
but I've got a question on page 2, under Shelburne Activities.
Okay.
Chittenden County Brownfields Program.
Yep.
Where is Fairway at Spear? The project site.
Is that that's the development proposal there on the golf course?
Ah, okay. And what is involved there? What is the historic contamination that's?
I think we just, I don't know the details of that, except that we did some assessment work, and maybe others in the room know more about if that discovered anything. That doesn't look like a significant amount, so I'm guessing that maybe, you know, brownfields money is often used when there is a potential for something to be there, and then we use these brownfields monies to do some research and testing to see if there is anything there. So I don't know the specifics. I can follow up and find out if there is
Well,
anything.
happily, Dean's available.
you know
Would
Dean?
you
Oh,
like
good.
I was
to?
looking at Chris.
As is the landowner.
But I'm not sure if, I think you're going to say it wasn't something that you had requested.
Yes, it was.
It was?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So then I'm
okay.
going to stand up.
So I'm Chris Snyder with Snyder Homes, and we did work with CCRPC on a Phase 1 environmental study as required under our financing and also project moving forward. And there are brownfields money that are available for new projects, and so that's one thing that they do help with in getting that done. And so they basically do an analysis through an environmental engineer to determine if there's any contamination on the property, and there was none. So,
Oh, thank you, Chris.
yep.
That's a good conclusion.
Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Does your office assist, I mean, you are consultation mostly in your work with the town? But
Yeah.
do you assist with grant writing?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, that's a significant thing. I don't see any here, but particularly, a lot of grant writing has been around stormwater, clean water compliance work. So we've been doing quite a bit of work with municipalities on that, whether it's for a Better Roads grant, or there's been some other block grants and some other pots of money that A&R has been made available for clean water. I just mentioned that one in particular, just because it's recent. But, Brownfields is one of those, other V-Trans grants. So happy to help with any grant that.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and really, I kind of view our work as our staff supplementing town staff. So, if there's a peak issue or a peak demand, where your staff is fully committed and you need some help with something, maybe we can help fill that gap. Or maybe it's something that, we work on more than you guys, like the GIS work.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
town plan's a great example of, the energy section for every community
Right.
was just revamped, and CCRPC really had dedicated support
Yep.
to the town to help implement that and then draft it and vet it and go through the entire review process, so,
Great.
yeah.
I have a question, Charlie. On page 3, under the Shelburne Projects and Transportation
Yep.
Improvement, can you expound a little bit about the intersection upgrades for Falls Road, Harbor Road, and Route 7, the 1.54 million? I don't know if any of it's been done yet. I don't think so.
No, it has not been done. And you notice that does not have a date,
Yeah.
a year associated with it, and that it's phrased at the last part there, it says illustrative project, pending availability of funds. To the best of my recollection, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, the town manager, through your then manager, Joe Colangelo, requested that this project be added to the tip, which we're able to do, but it doesn't force V-Trans to actually put it in their budget. So it's kind of in our capital program, but not in the state's capital program. So it's there, and I think the message, I think that our board takes away from that is that that's a very high priority for Shelburne Selectboard, and you're hoping that it gets funded, and so it's there. But, we're kind of dependent on V-Trans picking it up and moving it forward into the capital program, into their budgeting process, so.
And we would use our local representatives, for example, to lobby V-Trans to do that, or
Sure.
could we ask you to help us do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I always kind of say it doesn't hurt to ask, directly to V-Trans, the state representatives, certainly our board. The one thing, just in the bigger picture of what's going on with V-Trans kind of capital program and prioritization is they're updating the prioritization and the project selection process in a way that I believe will be much more transparent, and so you'll be able to really see the scoring of projects and understand, maybe where you are in the ranking, and maybe sometimes there's something that could be done with a project to help move it up in terms of what's included in a project, but I think we're probably still a year or two away from that process getting fully integrated into the system. But in the meantime, yes, ask away.
Okay,
In the-
well, since we're on that, can you help us with the Bay Road underpass bridge? Might as well ask.
Well, we've tried to help a little. What, exactly what do you mean by that?
It needs to be
To actually
elevated and widened, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you probably have had better experts than me talk to you about that project. So do you have well, I should ask that as a question. Please tell me that you've had better experts than me talk to you about the issues there. So, I mean, that's a railroad bridge, right? And so, I think it's kind of, again, getting possibly state funds, because the state does help make railroad project investments, as they got federal funds to improve the whole line from Rutland up to Burlington. But it didn't include things like that. They're obviously doing a big project in Middlebury. But again, I think it's something to keep advocating for. But again, it's not anywhere in the capital program. I know we were kind of helping you with signage and trying to help how to manage that, but
So how do we begin that process of getting it in the capital improvement program?
yeah, I think it is, make the specific request. I think a lot of these things are always going to come back also to town priority. And I think, so is that a higher priority than the Falls Road Harbor Road intersection, right? Like, that may be one of the first questions. If it's in a different pot of funds, maybe you can have two number one priorities, because that's more of a rail project than an intersection project. So that's kind of number one, is where is it in terms of your priorities? And that one is also something, to talk to the railroad about. So they're a player in that. They own that, or I shouldn't say they own, but they have the lease rights to that line. And so that one gets a little more complicated as to, if there's a railroad need, like it's structurally deficient and they're going to replace the bridge, then we have a good opportunity. If it's not, then there's really no other external push to replace it. Don't mean to be negative about it, but just trying to be realistic.
Yeah, it's a municipal concern, considering that we have a quint truck that can only fit under it in going in one direction. And
Right.
that's an entire population that isn't well served if the other side of Bay Road or Harbor Road is blocked.
Yep.
And then there's constant traffic concerns,
Yep.
safety concerns.
Yeah.
But does it impact the functioning of the rail? No.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, from what I understand, that it might not qualify for federal funding through the rail system.
Yeah, potentially. Again, I think getting V-Trans and to what extent the railroad would have to be on board, I'm not exactly certain. But I think, again, we're kind of back to let's have clear town priority, communicate with legislators, the agency of transportation, in this case, maybe the railroad, and us as well about your priorities. And keep pushing. I wish I had a quicker answer than that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a priority. It's been a priority as long as I've been on the board, and it's on the agenda tonight.
Do you know if it's actually been scoped out to determine how the structure would need to be replaced and redesigned? I know we've been kind of
Minimally.
dealing with the traffic flow issues and signage and how to do that, but
Minimally, I know that in order to elevate it, it extends, because it changes the elevation throughout that entire area. And so I remember we had some meeting at some point where they talked about that. But that's about it. And then we were told it was going to be really, really, really expensive, but nobody ever even gave us a figure.
that's something we can help with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's a large operational problem, but what do you do when that track is pulled up for reconstruction?
yeah, I can't answer that.
So
question.
you'd likely have a
So-
substitute track, and I mean, that's a pretty complicated project.
Engineering venture.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the details of it, but if this is something the town's interested in having us do more work on as like a scoping study for our next work program, this next month, we'd come out with our requests to towns to tell us what you'd like us to work on in FY21. If this is something that we should figure out, particularly getting a cost estimate and some conceptual design of what would actually need to happen there to really resolve the issues.
There's an ideally.
We can certainly talk about that.
Yeah, and again, you may have other priorities too that you want to
Yeah.
discuss that with, but.
Just a quick note on the Falls Road intersection, understanding that any sort of significant change there is complicated and expensive, but at my request, V-Trans did come this year and take a look at the signal timing of all the various lights, and they fine-tuned it as best as they can given the existing equipment that's there. And we all know there are frustrations at certain times of day with certain turning movements, but they are willing to work with us on incremental changes as best they can, and they've been very responsive on that, as well as on some of the signal heads on Shelburne Road that are supposed to turn green when fire or rescue go through, and they don't work very well right now, and they've been very responsive about a plan to fix those. So we are making progress with VTrans where we can, and some of these are bigger picture issues, especially the rail bridge. Best of my knowledge, it's not structurally deficient, and that's what makes it hard to elevate it on a statewide priority list. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. If it were structurally deficient, it might be a very different conversation, but we can still push for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah.
Charlie, any questions for us?
No, not at this time.
Thanks for such a thorough report.
Maybe more than
Yeah.
you bargained for, but thank you for reading.
It makes you wonder how anybody can catch a second breath in your shop. I mean, gee, it's an amazing thing, and I'm sorry John wasn't here tonight, but we appreciate Dean and Chris's and Lee's involvement. We have a number of staff persons who are
So do we.
critical to the effort, and
We appreciate it.
it's always a pleasure.
It's all
to-
about partnerships.
It's a great partnership.
Yeah, it's just fantastic, really.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, have a
Thanks,
good night.
Charlie.
Appreciate it. The next item is Shelburne Heights wastewater matter, a question of restitution from which Mike will be recusing himself.
Goodbye.
No, we will reschedule this matter to a future time, and that's based on the fact that it's been brought to our attention that there is additional materials to be reviewed, which we neither have nor therefore have had the opportunity to review. And given that, we're going to go on to 9B, which is the next item, for which Lee has provided us two motions. Would someone like to start with motion 1?
I'll start, although we called it 9A.
Oh, we did?
We did.
Sorry. So we've just done 9B, and this is now 9A.
Pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313, I move to find that premature general public knowledge of pending or probable civil litigation to which the public body is or may be a party would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Jamie seconds. Mary has moved. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those are...
No, just my discussion is as far as going into executive session. My feeling is there's been the threat of litigation, and I understand the wanting to hear what the town attorney's opinion on this matter is, but until we actually have something something filed, then I don't know what the opinion matters until we have something to act upon. So that's my personal opinion about it. That being said, I understand the desire to hear, and I'm not opposed, but I just feel like there's probably not as much necessity for it right now.
Thank you, Colleen. Any other discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. In this case, Colleen votes nay. Jamie, Mary, and Jerry vote aye. Next motion?
Pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313, I move to enter executive session to consider pending or probable civil litigation to which the public body is or may be a party, and to invite the town manager and town attorney to participate.
Second.
Mary moves, Jamie seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Again, Colleen voting nay. Thank you. We will be at least 15 minutes, and we're not sure from there. Hey, good to see you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. The next item is the request from CDI for the town to apply for a CDBG grant.
Where would be good for you, right here? Or?
You can be there if you'd like. I can advance your slide.
Sure, thanks. Okay. So I'm Julia Curry, and I am a consultant with Cooperative Development Institute. I work for the Shelburne Wood Co-op, so we have Jamie and Tracy here, the board chair and secretary. And so the board has asked me to work with them on this project that some of you may have been familiar with. It was something that was explored first a few years ago, and then kind of went on the shelf for a bit. But the co-op is interested in picking that back up. So the potential project is to add approximately 28 additional lots on land that the co-op owns. That's basically behind the existing lots. And the request to the town is to consider applying for a CDBG planning grant, which would allow the co-op to explore this project and determine whether it is actually feasible. I'm sure you all are familiar with the affordability of manufactured homes compared to really, any other homeownership option in our region. So the co-op sees this as a benefit to the co-op and to the town, providing home ownership at a lower cost than rental. Manufactured homes these days are very well built, not the image that some folks have of the very old ones, which were not very well built. So they are high quality housing. And some of you may know that in the park currently, there's actually a mix of manufactured homes, a couple of the Vermont modular homes. There's a tiny home. So it's a slightly broader community than some other mobile home parks. So I think, if we could go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. So the co-op sees this as fitting with the town's goals for residential development in that, it's in the village center. It's adding affordable and workforce housing, very compact development. Infrastructure is all in place to make that feasible in terms of the roadway that exists through Harrington Village and the electrical and water lines that currently exist in the park. So this was a sketch plan that was done those couple of years ago. So it is just conceptual. And the main purpose of the grant would be to hire engineers to really do a much more thorough assessment. And so if in fact they determine that it is possible, to develop, the plan that they come up with would probably look something like this, but, not necessarily be exactly this. So as noted, this would require partnering with Champlain Housing Trust, and they actually were involved in the discussions a couple years ago and would be, a friendly partner. The park is a very desirable location. It actually keeps a wait list. It really doesn't do any marketing, but gets a wait list of folks who are interested in knowing when lots are coming available. And we would work together to raise the financing, presuming that the planning grant, panned out and showed that it was possible, that development was possible. Then the park would take responsibility for managing that development and, organizing the financing. And this park and others around Vermont have worked with several entities that place homes in parks. So Efficiency Vermont works with the Vermods. Habitat for Humanity has placed some of them in other manufactured home communities. There's also Fecto Homes, which is based in Berlin, and they place homes on spec. So, there would be a lot of options for doing this in a financially responsible way. The request again is for the town to consider applying for a VCDP grant on behalf of this project. And this would be for a planning grant. So the terms there, the state requires a 25% match. The maximum grant that they will award is $60,000. And if the select board agrees to go forward to the next step, which would be to hold a public hearing, we would use the intervening time to flesh out what that budget would look like. So At this point, we're thinking it would probably make sense to apply for the maximum, but that's a preliminary take. And we would know that by the time of the public hearing. So that's where it stands now. And Jamie and Tracy are here in case there are questions or any that I can answer.
So the town has to come up with 25% of whatever the grant is. So in this particular case, it would be $15,000. And
So
it can be done in kind?
The town is not responsible for all of that. What the grant program states is that they look to the town to provide some of that, and it's unspecified what the ratio would be. So,
And it could be in kind.
and it can be in kind staff time. Yep. And the co-op already does have the funds available that, to make up whatever remains of that 25%.
Understood.
Yep.
And are the costs basically soft costs for engineering and design?
Yeah.
Is it site infrastructure involved, or?
There wouldn't be, I wouldn't expect infrastructure at the planning stage. It is the first time I've worked on a project like this, so I don't want to speak beyond my experience, but I don't believe there would be any infrastructure.
Okay.
Casey, didn't the DRB already approve that sketch?
I don't believe so. I don't know, Mary.
Okay.
I've got a couple of comments and a question for you. First of all, I think mindful of the timing, January, February seems like a long time away, but for us entering budget, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And something much sooner than a February date would be necessary for us because we have to complete budget before that, and we have a potential impact here. Given that, I would expect the next time that we discuss this, an agreement with CHT is on paper.
Okay.
Because that's an absolute essential. If there's no agreement, there's no project. And while those considerations are being are taking some formal structure, I'd like to review or revisit the question of access to the Shelburne shopping center, which, when the DRB reviewed some of this, it was an experience I had. I think it's very important to give every consideration that can be given to a walking access to the shopping center from Shelburne Wood, which prevents the certain risks that are attending even now with Harrington Village residents walking along Route 7. And the sketch doesn't provide anything that looks like that, but I would certainly greatly appreciate at least some commentary about that. That's a pretty stiff gully, as some of us know, and I'm not sure what the environmental requirements are going to be or how expensive this project's going to be, but I would anticipate you'll have some dollars. You might explain what the house is at the very end, because that's not included, right?
It's not.
No, that's a separate.
That's a private residence.
Together,
Yeah.
That's they call it the Father Defoe house.
It's the Spillane's on
The Spillane's on it. It has a right-of-way access through the mobile home park, and it would still have right-of-way access.
Yeah, and that might be a supplementary submission, because we would want to be sure that that owner is protected here. Okay? The last is just a program question. CDBG monies ordinarily are targeted to census districts and have an income test. How is Shelburne Wood eligible?
Yeah, and that is a question that I'm going to get more advice on. But when Shelburne Wood was converted as a cooperative, part of that process involved doing income surveys. of the then residents. That is an option we could pursue again if it seemed like there was value in updating it. So manufactured homes are considered what's called naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAH housing. It doesn't, there's no income test to buy one, right? The way there is with CHT housing, for instance. But what we do have are statistics on, the incomes of folks who lived at the park when it converted to a cooperative. And we would have similar data for the Lakeview Co-op that converted more recently, just to provide more examples of, the households in, and there are others around Chittenden County, but those are the ones in Shelburne. So I think that maybe the Chittenden County data would be substantially similar, and that's something we could look into.
Good. I mean, it sounds terrific. And we certainly, I'm sure, speaking for all of us, would want to support it in every way we could. But I'd encourage some putting a fine point on the pencil here, maybe sooner than you were planning to, just to accommodate, we're being selfish, but you're accommodating our budget schedule, which is fixed and pretty crowded.
Can I ask I'm sorry if this is naive, I'm trying to understand how this would work. The co-op would hire a developer, and they would basically sell the rights, or how does that work? I mean, is the co-op a true co-op in the sense that it's a not-for-profit arrangement?
So co-ops are not-for-profits, but they aren't 501c3s.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's an unusual status in that way. Right now, what we're looking at is exploring working with a developer like Amy Wright, or someone with that kind of background in creating affordable housing, who's familiar with things like the tax credit program, to explore all of those avenues, not just a kind of standard development financing approach. So, yeah, we really want to kind of identify the range of options.
But the income from the project goes back to the co-op?
That's right.
And then is that distributed among members, or it's?
I mean,
how does that work?
I think it's not typically distributed among members. That is an option, but typically what more often what co-ops will do with that is, if they do, get a net profit, so to speak, income from the project, would be to put it in their reserves. So part of why the co-op wants to do this project is because it's relatively small. There's 28 households, and this will strengthen it as a business, right? So it's not so much the kind of short-term returns to individual members as much as strengthening the long-term, well-being. I mean, the co-op's in great shape financially and otherwise, but keeping it that way.
But
yeah.
but these units would become members of the co-op?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
I see. Okay, thank you.
It's probably well early to even mention it, but keep in mind that the town has an arrangement with Harrington Village to maintain the road and some arrangements with water sewer infrastructure. I'm sure they'll get those questions will get picked up, in eventually your engineering analysis. But there's a good deal more here in terms of potential town cooperation. So, you want to want to speak to it, or?
I mean, I don't really have any information to add to what you said. It's my understanding there's this connection to this. Well, the idea of what we're doing now came about because this was somebody else's idea, and all.
Can you come to the mic and
sure.
let the folks at home know who you are?
Jamie Stanis, I'm the president of the cooperative. And the only thing I would say is that the reason that we are looking at this in the format that we're looking at it is that it was pretty much pre-planned. I mean, I was told that there were rights of way in place and deeded with the Champlain Housing Trust to make all the necessary connections What form those take at this point, I don't really know. And we're aware that we have to maintain rights of way that are currently deeded through the old part of the park. They may change somewhat because of the new road layout. And really what we're looking to do is bring in the expertise, because, I mean, at best, I know enough to be annoying about it. And, you know, we just need the people who can really figure it all out for us, because it's way over our heads.
Sure, sure.
So,
No, makes sense, sure, absolutely. Any other questions? Anybody?
okay.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
The next item is a question about impact fee. Lee is going to introduce.
Thank you. So this is an interesting question. I had spoken with Planning Director Dean Pierce about it, thought I'd seek some guidance from the board about it. Town has had an impact fee ordinance in place for a number of years. It requires the payment of impact fees when land development occurs that results in new dwelling units. So I build a new house or I build a new condominium, I have to pay those impact fees. The case before us, the question, relates to a landowner who purchased 2 condominium units side by side. It's roughly 12 years ago, as I understand it, removed some walls between them and took 2 units and made 1 unit out of them. That landowner now wishes to reestablish those as 2 dwelling units by doing whatever structural work is needed to recreate those as 2 separate units. So the question being, and the guidance I'm looking for from a policy perspective, does that constitute a new dwelling unit that would be subject to the impact fees? And, you know, Dean's been clear in his interpretation that yes, it requires a permit, it's new land development, it creates a new unit, the fees should be paid. Another possible way to look at it is reestablishing a unit that once had already existed and there aren't any new net units being added to the housing base today. So just looking for some historical perspective on because the Selectboard had adopted the ordinance some years back, and trying to see where we should go with this as a community.
Where does this particular impact fee go?
So Dean, there's a recreation impact fee, I think, and a school impact fee, CVU expansion, but you...
Yes, and it goes into an account or accounts that are entrusted to Peter's management. They don't see any daylight in the planning and zoning office. I would like to clarify something that Lee said. This is an issue that does stem from our interpretation of the impact fee ordinance, which we think is abundantly clear. It was designed to charge people who are creating dwelling units in Shelburne. It was designed to have them pay a fee that would offset the cost of some of the capital facilities that they would be responsible for. There are some unique features of Shelburne's impact fees. Those include a waiver provision when the project involves housing for the elderly and affordable housing. There's also a fairly unique element that has to do with basically giving the select board the authority to forgive someone the fee. That is the last section. It's included in the ordinance, and it is based on a previous instance that came to the board that was analogous to this one. And so a prior board's decision, basically forgiving someone's fees, is what led the Planning and Zoning Office to process this application in the following manner. We said, this went from 2 units to 1. It's now intended to go from 1 back to 2. It's subject to impact fees. If you write the check for the impact fee and we hold it, and you go to the board appealing the imposition of that fee, you may, based on previous experience, get that money back. So we were intending this, based on the board's previous action, to not result in the fee being paid, because based on the previous decision, we thought that it would be likely that the board would give the appellant what they wanted. The example that I'm referring to came about when someone owned a property that was residential. It shifted to be a daycare center with no residential use. It went back to being a residence. In other words, it created a single-family residence, something that would be subject to this, and the board gave the appellant their feedback. So that's what we expected here. It would be my position that if the board wants to differentiate what types of units that are created should pay the fee, then it really does require attention to the regulations. And the example I would use where a bright line is much more valuable than a dull line would be if the owners of the former Yankee Doodle Motel came in and said, well, you know, that was a motel. There were people living there. Those were units. We don't think that those new apartments that are going to replace it should be subject to impact fees. The ordinance should be interpreted consistently, and it should accomplish what the board wants. And what I'm saying is that when it was originally drafted, it was drafted to apply to the creation of single-family units or multifamily units.
Thank you, Dean. Questions?
I'm getting a little confused about so are we deciding policy or are we helping draft regulation?
No, we're using a waiver provision that's in the regulation, but
It's an
Dean is-
appeal provision, section 10 of the ordinance.
It would be helpful to have the ordinance in
Yeah.
front of us.
Yeah, section 10 holds that an individual and entity required to pay an impact fee under this ordinance may challenge the imposition of such fee or the amount of the fee. It spells out a process that goes to the town clerk. It says,
I'm sorry, but we're not being asked now to waive that fee. We're being asked how we want to interpret the policy.
well, I'm going to step back and say, from the planning and zoning standpoint, we're looking for whatever is necessary for us to know whether or not we give the check back.
I think if I understand correctly, we're being asked to waive the fee by the appellant, and we're being told there's a provision in the ordinance that allows us to do this.
Except that it does require a public hearing. So I'm looking for some informal guidance. We're not here tonight in a position really to make a decision in any direction.
Right, we'd have to warn.
Right.
I see.
I'm just looking for some guidance on historical perspective. Dean's offered.
And
So we need to have a hearing.
Dean, is the theory of the case that in this scenario, the impact would be a future transaction whereby one of the two units is sold to?
Well, she's intending to sell.
Okay.
That's our
And then-
understanding, is that she owned one, then got a second one, combined them. You're doing this division because it's her intention to sell.
Got
So
it.
it would go to two individuals or families or households
Yep.
rather than one.
I think we're being told that there's an ordinance that works that we can follow. We may not like the ordinance, but we need to have it set for a hearing so that we can determine if there's a basis for a waiver of the impact fee.
Right.
I think
As well
what
as-
might help is if maybe a question such as the one I'm going to ask, which is, when Creekside was built, did it not pay an impact fee?
No, it was before the ordinance.
Oh, okay. So this wouldn't be double dipping kind of on the part of the town.
Why do we have to have a hearing to issue a waiver?
The ordinance has a.
The ordinance.
Unfortunately,
It
the
says that
ordinance.
it says you
yes,
have to have a hearing.
It does
Oh.
state that. So the process, as
Well, maybe
Dean
that's
described
something we
it,
could change.
Do you
I
want
have to pay the fee, file an appeal, hope you get it
Have a
back.
hearing
Ellie, do you want to speak
instead
to
of
it?
just appeal to the select board and have it waived.
Hi, I'm Ellie Byers, and I'm the person who's stirred all this up. So just a few factual things I just want to say, in part on my own behalf. One is that Harbor Crossing was built in the early 80s. There are only 22 units. 12 years ago, I bought the adjoining unit, took the walls down, and now I have a kid in college, so this is my college fund. So I'm looking to put the walls back up and sell the end unit. For 12 years, the two units have been occupied by two people. And I am required by the association to return the end unit to its original floor plan. So it's like the unit's been gone for 12 years and now it's coming back. I just wanted to make sure you understood those circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Lee, you want to repeat your guidance?
Well, again, if the board had any thoughts on it, I'm just looking for some informal guidance, but you've heard very clear statements from Dean on the position and the process.
Okay.
I was wondering if there was a different
Yeah,
way
I mean,
to approach it, but
Right. It's a tricky one, right? In this scenario, it seems like common sense decision would be just the impact fee doesn't apply, but I think I've seen the ordinance and I don't have it in front of me, but the literal application of that ordinance does compel staff to apply the fee. So to me, it feels like we need to revisit that ordinance, which won't really help you in the short term because that'll take time. I don't think it's intended to address, to raise funds for this situation necessarily, but maybe that's open for public discussion.
It's a $1,700 fee, and
Right.
in my world, that's a heavy hit. So
It would be for any of us. No, I agree. I think the exception may prove the rule here, but I think in an instance where a waiver situation is repeating, rather than proceeding on the basis of making waivers, we're better spending time and energy looking carefully at the requirement to see whether that can be improved such that waivers wouldn't be required.
Dean, are there other instances that you can recall of something similar?
No.
Okay. And we don't anticipate there being a mass reconfiguration of condos along this line?
I should be clear. There are other instances of waivers, and a waiver, strictly speaking, is a reduction in a fee owing to the fact that the project involves housing for the elderly or housing that's affordable.
Right.
The appeals process resulting in forgiving of the fees, it's only that one other time that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And what's the basis for the forgiveness?
The basis in that previous instance,
Does the ordinance?
no,
Define
no,
criteria.
it's kind of, I think of it as a due process requirement, it's giving a person a chance to stand up and say,
Make your case for.
yeah, but there aren't any criteria.
But it's allowed under the ordinance, which none of us
Yeah,
have in front of us.
it,
The decision.
yeah, I'm happy to,
Yeah, it'd be.
I think there's two things going on here. I think there's discussion of perhaps changing the ordinance, but I don't think that helps Ms. Byers in the short run. And I think if there is the opportunity for us to consider, and in the hearing format, under the ordinance, waiving the impact fee, we should schedule it for a hearing. But I don't think we should tie up this applicant based on some growing appetite that there's something
Yeah,
wrong with
that's a
the
good
ordinance.
Yep, agreed.
That's
So,
good.
would you like a motion? Or would you
Well,
like to
we
make
have
a motion?
I guess we'd have to warn a public hearing.
Right,
Right.
so we
Right.
move to warn a public hearing
Yeah,
for this appeal,
Yeah,
for a waiver.
need a date.
But-
All right,
But it is possible for the town to hold on to the check.
I mean, my preference would be for the board to get out of
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with
this process, and I think, we have a zoning administrator in the town who, in my opinion, should be able to consider those appeals, right? It's awkward for the select board to jump into this, right?
Is
Making
there-
policy by exception is not ideal.
And is there a statutory requirement that these types of fees can be appealed to the select board?
It's
It's in the ordinance.
In the ordinance.
Right, it's in the
Yeah.
ordinance, but I mean, is there a state regulation or
not
something?
that I'm aware of. The impact fees are authorized by statute, and then it's really up to the towns to determine the amounts and the premise for them and any other processes. So in this case, as noted, there is built in this waiver concept.
Yeah.
Upon an appeal, a hearing can be held.
Yeah, it's just administratively cumbersome, even though it doesn't happen a lot. When it happens, it soaks up time for
Yep.
this board for warning public hearings, which are,
Ms. Byers, have you filed your notice of appeal?
No. I'm directed to see what came out tonight.
I don't see any reason why Ms. Byers shouldn't follow the procedure that we have in place, file a notice of appeal, and then we have 60 days to schedule a hearing, and then 45 days to decide it. Hopefully it wouldn't take that long.
So, understanding and the appeal hasn't yet been filed, could we proactively agree on a date if the appeal is filed so that we can
yes.
keep this moving
Yes.
forward? Because
Yeah,
if
I think that's a good
wait till the
idea.
next meeting, then
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
another 30 days
That's
out.
a good
and-
idea, Lee.
No problem.
Is that acceptable?
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
How about a motion to warn a public hearing as soon as a date becomes available, once an appeal has been filed? Then it leaves it open-ended. Does that work?
Colleen moves,
I'll second.
Mike seconds. Is there any further discussion? Questions? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. We'll move along with as much dispatch as we can muster here. Thank you, Dean. Appreciate your contribution.
Copies for everybody, if I can get my original back, and I'll see that you
Yeah.
understand that it's an original version, then there was an amendment, and there's also a resolution. It'll have three.
Yeah,
Thank
it'd be
you.
helpful to have all of that if we could.
Thank you, Dean. The next item is the Bay Road Railroad underpass. Again, Colleen, do you want
Yeah.
to sort of sum up the prior discussion, or?
Yeah. So essentially, we already kind of addressed the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is something needs to happen to that overpass bridge, and we're specifically not talking about the Bay Road Bridge where people can walk across the La Platte, but specifically the railroad overpass. And it's narrow, and it's low. So we've already had a truck that got stuck under there. What was that, about a year ago or so? And let's see, back when Joe was still town manager, we went through 2 different types of trials of traffic flow under that bridge and trialed it, and then decided, okay, well, neither of them are perfect, but we're going to go with this. And this was putting a stop sign on either end of the bridge and then still maintaining 2 lanes of traffic, even though it's not marked. And so each side would have to stop and then go, but they could go at the same time. And the premise behind that was that it would slow down traffic, so people weren't running into one another, but at the same time, it wouldn't impede traffic flow to the same degree as one-way traffic underneath the bridge would. Unfortunately, it's not a common situation, and while people in the town might understand how it works, the Shelburne Farms is the 3rd most popular tourist attraction in Vermont, and especially during the summer, we see a lot of out-of-staters, and not just out-of-staters, but out-of-countryers. And so there's been a series of complaints and problems, and like to the point where drivers have gotten into almost arguments and fights going underneath that bridge. People expect that when they stop at the stop sign that it's going to be one-way traffic. And so I relayed, and I think I relayed this publicly, but I'm not sure, but I will now, just this summer, and I stopped, and there was another driver at the other end, and they stopped, and I started to go. Well, they had already started to go. Well, that driver was going down the center of the bridge, and I was going down my side. So we had to stop. And that driver was yelling at me in French. So I'm assuming they're from Canada, but I'm not sure. And he was pounding the roof of his car and absolutely positive that I was doing something wrong. And there's no way for me to describe because I could understand why he thought that. And so it just brought to the forefront that there's something wrong with this and there's not going to be a great solution. We've talked about what the great solution is, which nobody can afford. And so we have to find the most economical, most efficient Band-Aid that we can put on this. And so I had discussed either if we are saying that that's 2-lane traffic, then we should mark it appropriately. It should have like a dotted line down the center so people know it's still 2 lanes of traffic. The disadvantage of doing that means that if anybody is trying to walk on that underneath the bridge, there's no room for a pedestrian in 2 lanes of traffic or bikers. Okay, so that's the downside to doing that. The other option is that we say it's 1 lane of traffic. And that means that we stop on either end and people have to take turns. Legally, there's no way for us to say that it's 2 lanes of traffic, but that's under like federal guidelines. Those are guidelines. And the same thing is, I'm sure in all of our careers, we have guidelines, but they don't necessarily apply to specific situations. And this is one that there's not a great guideline that governs this perfectly. So I think either putting a sign and saying alternating traffic would work, or we put the dotted lines, knowing that they're going to have to be repainted frequently. But you know what? Paul's really good at this. And if he has a better solution, great. But other than that, like repainting it for a cost of, I think it was quoted to me that it costs like $80 to repaint dotted lines down there twice a year. Then fine, we just keep repainting it. It's not a great solution, we know that. But unless somebody else can come up with a better thought, this was kind of where I was going. Either we need to make it and say it's alternating traffic and put a sign that says alternating flow, or we paint the dotted lines. Anybody, any thoughts?
Well, I live out that way, so I go there all the time. I'll just back up a little bit. This came to my attention earlier this summer by a few constituents who were having issues, the same kind of issues that you had, Colleen. So I contacted the railroad and not surprisingly was told by Peter Young that it's not their responsibility at all. They're only responsible for the tracks, not what is underneath it. I then ended up contacting somebody at VTrans and learned that unless we can establish that it is a safety hazard, they're not going to, the state won't throw any money at this. It's not a state road. So that's the problem that we have, I think, as far as that goes. So
As
it would
far
be
as the long-term.
long-term, like widening it, right,
Yeah.
or whatever. So you're articulating it correctly. We've got a tough situation that we have to figure out. I think your phrase earlier was, we have a Band-Aid. We have to figure out which is the right Band-Aid. Because I don't see it's going to get widened unless and until we can establish. I mean, your point about the quint is a good one. I know there have been a couple of instances, I was aware, obviously, painfully aware of the truck that got stuck underneath. And now and then, something can happen where you have to get rerouted. There was a house that burned to the ground on the east side of the bridge, so it would have been fastest for emergency people to come Harbor Road to Bay, but they couldn't get through. So they have to come around the other way. So there are some instances, I think, where you might be able to make safety as an issue, but I'm not sure what the criteria is for that. So.
And the other piece that I've learned in my research is that even if the bridge were structurally unsound and had to be replaced, the VTrans and rail obligation is to replace in kind what's there. And if the town wanted it widened and raised, that might well be on our dime to pay for any expansions of the existing structure.
Unless we could show it was unsafe
As constructed, yeah.
Right. So personally, I know there's 2 camps of people, even in my neighborhood. There are some people who say, I've been driving 2 cars under this bridge for 30 years. I'm not going to start doing a one-way now. I do the one-way when I go through.
That's what I do.
just because I want to be safe. There've been a number of times where I've gone through and somebody's walking or trying to bike through, and it just feels really dangerous, and in the winter, it gets fairly narrow. So I don't have a particular answer, but I do think this, to have a stop sign and both going at the same time is confusing for folks. So I don't have a great answer. I have a preference. I would prefer it be one way, and I liked it, the original fix. They painted lines to make it clear that it was one way, and they even put those little, yeah, not Jersey barriers. I was gonna say Jersey barriers. So, and I liked that. To me, that made it clearer. But I have a feeling, I wasn't around, but I have a feeling that when that happened, there was a bit of an uproar.
Yes.
And then it went back to the two-way as a compromise, so.
Didn't we do a survey at some point to collect information about preferences? I seem to remember that.
I don't think
It
it
was
was
a
a
study
survey.
of Bay Road. I'm not sure, was that an element of that?
Well,
don't
Cy at
think it was a survey.
CCRPC was involved in all those prior discussions about, do you try to force it one way, do you put the stop? And, the practical reality is, it's almost more a human behavior thing. I mean, I asked Cy, like, could we put up signs that say take turns? But it's not MUTCD compliant, so you can't do it. Maybe there's a sign like alternating traffic that is legal to put up if that's the way we want to go with it. I don't try to force my way through it with another car coming, but other people may differ on that.
But it seems
Just
that
seems-
no matter what you do, somebody gets angry. So if you wait, somebody gets angry because you're waiting, so sort of like a no-win
It's a
situation.
classic small-town conundrum.
Yes.
How do we?
Could put up a
How do
toll
we
booth
solve
and
First
start
world
raising money for
problem.
the expansion.
Right.
I don't know what to do.
What's your preference? Would you like to see it striped?
I don't care as long as I think that the way that it's set up right now is just confusing to anybody who's
Yeah.
not familiar with it. So I don't really care. I think we just have to choose one or the other. Because right now we're saying, well, we don't really want it to be 2 lanes, but we're allowing it. And that's not putting forth like a consistent message. And we're almost like asking for problems. Either we're saying it's one way or it's not.
Is it worth asking Paul Goodrich what he thinks?
I think it's always worth having him
Yeah.
come in and speak.
Well, it sounds like we've asked him, and he said you're just going to keep repainting.
He says it would
Right.
go over the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did the planning commission, what's it, Charlie? Sorry, didn't he
Well,
offer?
we've had them in looking at this several times, and again, as noted, we've tried several different approaches over the past several years with varying levels of success. I mean, I get occasional calls too. It's hard to know how representative they are of the larger picture, but clearly there's personal experience that's been, shall we say, unpleasant and frightful.
Right.
I just think the way that it is right now, we're splitting the baby.
I mean, if I were waving my magic wand, I'd say go one way, one at a time, because it's hardly room for
Yeah.
2 vehicles. And it's one thing if you got 2 Mini Coopers passing each other. It's another thing if you have 2, big Ford pickups.
Right.
Well, how
Do
about,
you- how
how
does
about
the
at the
public
next
want to say
meeting, you
that?
come back with a review of that direction with pros and cons of one way? Linda?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. I travel under that bridge almost every day. Some of the dogs I walk are out there. And I think it would make a difference if you had a sign there that said alternating traffic. I mean, you have the little flag and it kind of looks like you should take turns, but just make it more clear.
I agree.
Yeah, right now, it's not alternating traffic. Right now, it's stop and then go in a narrow lane. So I agree with you. Either we make it alternating traffic and make it clear, or we put a dotted line and it says people have to stay on that edge of that very little lane. But I think the pros and cons, we elucidated those all 2 years ago when Joe went through these 2 studies.
Well, I'll be glad to summarize those and present. I'll give you my recommendation.
Yeah.
Talk to Paul and talk to Cy again. And
I'd be happy with that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that.
Sure. Be glad to.
Okay.
That acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, everybody. Next item is the property. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment? Hearing none, the next item.
Just to build on what Linda had said, I think if it's going to be alternating traffic, we also need somewhere previous to the underpass and on either side a sign that says single lane underpass ahead.
Oh, very good. I wonder, can we put that on the bridge? Can we put a sign that says single lane?
There's an idea that would make
we
it.
allowed to
But
put
you're right,
something on
Tom,
their bridge?
some early warning would be, because a lot of users won't even know that they're coming on a tunnel. You know, yeah, so,
I'll look into that, whether we'd be allowed to put a sign on the overpass itself.
yeah. Thank you, Tom. Next item is the property tax collection policy, which is being presented to us for approval this evening.
So this has been through several versions and iterations. It's received legal counsel review. Council made several recommendations that bring it back closer in line to the League of Cities and Towns model policy. Previously, we had discussed the notion of perhaps a 3-year lead time, if you will, or follow-up time for someone to make good on their delinquent taxes. This would bring that back to a 1-year time frame from 1 year from the end of the prior fiscal year, whenever the taxes became delinquent. It doesn't require bringing out the heavy hammer, if you will, to pursue payment, but it gives us the ability to do that. It also clarifies, as we are allowed to under statute, that if we did go to tax sale, we're entitled to recover collection costs up to a certain point. And rather than specify what those were, I thought it better to just reference the applicable statute, because if we reference a percentage and the state changes it, then we're automatically out of sync with that. So this is just trying to clarify, soup to nuts, that here's the normal process for payment of taxes, but if one becomes delinquent, there's going to be further actions taken to pursue those, up to and including the possibility of a tax sale if necessary. Just by way of information, we did take in another $37,000 in the last couple of weeks on delinquent taxes. So we're down to less than 300,000 right now, at least in the top 10, if you will, what I've been pursuing.
That's
And
super.
We've been ratcheting those down. The goal of the board was to have a clear policy. We've been operating in a reasonable manner, but this would clarify precisely how the town intends to follow through on these.
Comment, Mike?
No, I think I was trying to actually sort out what you felt was unfortunate in the policy.
Last paragraph regarding the time that might be taken to establish subdivision.
Yeah, I wasn't pleased to learn that, but it's a statutory requirement, and the matter there is statute requires us to allow up to a day before a tax sale that a property owner can say, I'd like you to sell just a part of my property. I want to subdivide it.
Oh, I see. Okay. And that's
And
required.
to me,
by
that sort of holds the
statutory.
town hostage for some unknown
Sure.
period of time, but we're required to allow it.
Okay.
So,
All right.
That's
Thank
settled.
you.
I think this represents good work. I'm happy with it. I'm glad that the paragraph got put in about tax abatement.
Me too. I think it's great, and I like the idea of identifying the town manager as the decision maker about payment plans, because there could be in the future a separation of tax collector position and town manager. So
Yeah,
I'm
there
glad
could well
that
be.
was addressed too. Jamie?
On the new language and the clear demonstration of hardship, I think we talked about this, but the criteria for that, we sort of contemplate what we have in the existing late tax payment policy, right? The waiver.
that
There's
would
a list
be,
of
Right, unforeseen medical emergency
Medical.
or, yeah, we could certainly, those would be
Would it
the
be worth
criteria.
referencing
Yeah, and
that?
that's what I'm wondering. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd be comfortable just, I don't know if we want to move this forward tonight. We've
Yeah.
looked at it multiple times, so I'd be comfortable just incorporating those criteria by reference or somehow. That's the idea. I'd want,
Yeah, I think making the criteria clear makes some sense. I
Yep.
thought about that. It's got to be economic,
little-
to be sure, right? It has, there's
Right.
no other, and that, so I thought, well, clear demonstration of hardship, yeah. Maybe.
As provided in, and it just makes us consistent.
Sure.
And remember, we spent quite some time defining hardship. And that could be an edit here, couldn't it, with everybody's agreement?
I think so, yeah.
So as provided in that other policy that we
yeah.
already have in
So
place.
you-
or you could just
and just
include it
reference
here.
Or include it here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so you don't have to.
I would
No,
move
that
to
makes good
approve
sense.
it. Second.
Mary moves approval with the amendment. Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Lee, for all of your work on this.
Thank you. Thank you all.
The next item is the review of the capital improvement program. This is the second of two. Peter is going to take us through it.
So the last meeting, we just kind of went through the capital plan broad brush in terms of talking about why we do it and what it includes and that sort of thing. We're kind of moving into the phase now where we would need to look at the list of projects, determine if that's a sufficient list. Are there projects that should be taken out, projects that should be added? And then also, obviously, the priority. What priority should we be giving to some of these? So to try to, without having to go through each project line by line, we tried to break it down into a couple of, several categories. One obviously is existing facilities and infrastructure, projects relating to those. Paul Goodrich would like to, again, consider chip sealing Pond Road, again, based on the maintenance issues that he's experiencing there, and I'll let him speak to all of that, but he feels that's a priority for existing infrastructure. Energy efficiency improvements, that's something that we have talked about, and actually the dollars should be flipped on that. The energy efficient projects are $5,000 a year, and storm drain replacements are $40,000. Apologize for that error. Storm drain replacements, those are really the systems that we've got, the existing systems. And in looking at that, it certainly, I think, needs to be coordinated with the whole stormwater process that Chris Robinson heads up. They're really interrelated. One's replacing old mains that are failing, and the other is putting in new facilities to meet regulatory requirements. And then also the existing system that we have with bike and pedestrian projects, and basically making those safer, not necessarily adding new ones. And then the second category is new projects, things that we don't have in place today, but would like to add within the horizon of the capital improvement plan. Obviously, the fire station relocation, fire and rescue facility location, it speaks to that. Stormwater projects are not in place today, but certainly will be within the next 5 years. Some improvements to our grounds maintenance equipment. The big one that we had talked about last meeting was to be able to access our trails with a vehicle that can get out there versus trying to squeeze through with a pickup truck or something like that. There's a need for that, and maintaining the systems that we've got. We've got a pretty extensive bike and ped system in town with all the improvements, and to be able to maintain it and to access it, not only for maintenance, but if there's an emergency or something, speaks to that. And then going on from there, the beach house project that the Recreation Department's been working very hard on developing a plan for. New project, again, replacing the existing facility that is in need of repair and replacement. And then bike path construction in terms of what we're looking at there. The biggest project obviously is the Irish Hill Road and the Platte Bridge, a project that's well underway now that Dean's managing. Another category is equipment. What do we have? What do we need to both equipment-wise for maintenance, but also for functioning in the town offices? Replacing the town computer server. Will be coming at end of life. Do we replace it with another in-house server? Do we go to the cloud? Considerations there. Again, maintaining the bike and ped paths that we have in place. I'm seeing a real need, and you'll hear that from the department heads for police emergency services, radio replacements. Existing radios become obsolete. The big issue now that we're looking at having that capability is to be able to communicate with area departments so that you can share a frequency. A lot of times the equipment that we've got now doesn't have that capability. That's an issue for all of those areas, and we'll be definitely looking at probably a budget amount for that in the coming fiscal year. We'll be budgeting for. Communications equipment, and again in the dispatch center, we dispatch for over 30 different agencies, and to be able to maintain that system, again, upgrading as needed to be able to try to communicate with all the areas that the agencies we serve have radio equipment for. That's important as well. The normal replacements for the fire department, the rescue boat, fire tanker, which will be well past its probably useful life towards the end of this plan, and replacing a utility vehicle that's currently been in service for a number of years. Again, Paul each year brings up the fact that with additional roads and additional infrastructure, it's more difficult with his staff of 5, one of who's a mechanic, to serve all of those needs. So to be able to keep up with that maintenance and winter maintenance is always looking at the need for additional personnel and an additional vehicle to support that. And then just the normal replacement of vehicles. What's our strategy for that? We replaced cruisers, dump trucks, pickups, and just again looking at that strategy in terms of how to meet that need as economically and efficiently as possible. And then the other category I think that certainly deserves consideration, in meeting with the Planning Commission last week, there was definitely an interest in making a transition from what's in the town plan to actual implementation of those. And that's something I don't think with the plan that we've got now in place, we don't want to lose sight of. Things like energy efficiency improvements, village area improvements, items that are identified in the town plan as priorities. How do they happen? They get in the capital plan and then they get funded. So I think that's a important perspective to have. And I think the Planning Commission is certainly very interested in making those recommendations as well. And then outside of the property tax portion of the budget, our water and sewer departments obviously have large projects planned. In the case of the water department, it's mostly replacing existing lines. That's a nationwide issue that are no longer reliable. We're just having replacement strategies in place. And then, as you well know from the meetings we've had with Chris Robinson, the sewer collection system, improving that so that it's tightened up so that you don't have the infiltration problems that we experience now, as well as the treatment plants. A big decision there in terms of whether, when they come to end of life, do we replace them or do we pursue the connection to South Burlington? So they're just kind of general categories without going through line by line and is this in, is this out, but I'm really looking for the board's input in terms of where we go from here. Like I said, projects you'd like to see included that aren't here, or projects you think that could be deferred. And then priority-wise, our priority typically is the ones that we do in early years, and less priority would be the projects you would see in years 5 and 6. So at this point, just looking for a general input as to how we can kind of zero in on those areas and move forward with a plan that we look at. This has pretty much been, at this point, driven by the department heads. And I did find it beneficial to meet with the planning commission, though, to make sure that town plan is something that we do include consideration of projects that will support that as well. So from there, just kind of looking for your input. Lee, I don't know if you had any other
No, I
thoughts
think
at this
that's
point, or, so.
You know, last time you saw the proposed items broken out by department, and what Peter's done, I think, very helpfully here is now looking at them in a categorical sense, which I think is a helpful construct, because it integrates them better.
I think our opportunity, one thing, by the way, that I think should be an immediate add under 4 is economic development. But I think our opportunity is to be satisfied that we have identified everything we think should be in the plan. So that as we consider it from here, we're dealing with a whole. I think the next steps have to be adjustments in the CIP, which is not a forever permanent document based on some budget decisions.
Right.
Some of our budget decisions might be to allocate, even affect allocations in future years, in which case we'd make changes in the progression. But it also enables us to think seriously about reserves or early payments for some things. We'll get some information. Aren't we waiting on the outcome of the grant application for radios?
That's what I was
Yeah.
going to ask.
I just found out last week, as you know, that application was submitted roughly a year or more ago, and we just found out that we were not awarded
Okay.
that grant. Many departments will tell you that it takes at least 3 tries to succeed there. We
Well,
gave it
that
our
was our
best shot.
second, so, hey.
That was for fire, right?
That was for combined fire and rescue
Yeah.
radio upgrade.
But they're
so
broken out here, right?
They
look
are
like
just
they're
by way
separate.
of department, but it was an integrated
Combined,
application.
800K, in that range?
So-
It makes no
Yeah.
sense to phase something like that in. That's a kind of one and done.
Yeah, that was the case with the 230 for the police, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the plan is to upgrade everything, so everybody's using the same equipment. That's what I've told, anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. I don't know how you do that parcel, you know. Reactions?
Well, I have a couple reactions. One, I had a question about the radios, because I did think that we might get it, and that would have left us paying, I think, a small fraction, 25%, or just 5.
Yeah.
We
So
will
is
be
the idea
monitoring
that we'll
and-
apply again, or is there no time left to wait?
Well, each year, the priorities, I shouldn't say each year, often the priorities change from year to year in those federal programs. So I monitor those constantly, and if communications equipment is a priority again in the next cycle, we'll certainly be giving it another try and figuring
I know
out.
you worked hard on that. I know that
It's
the
time consuming.
The
Yeah,
one thing
but-
that's not in here that I would have thought, based on the presentations that we got from the departments at budget last year, was security in this building, and that was a big ticket item, if I remember correctly.
We did actually have, I think there's a line item in
Yeah,
there
it's in
for
the-
security improvements.
It's on
We
the
didn't,
police.
we didn't
item 10.
identify them specifically for obvious reasons, but
Okay.
we did have a line item in there for that. And that's something that will be
75.
probably coming to you with the next year's budget request.
you.
And some work on that was done in this current, in the just completed fiscal year. So that was an incremental project. They were hoping to do it all at once. We funded a part of it, so some work was done. More work is still to be done.
Thank you. It's very thorough. Jerry, I like your idea of a reserve. I don't know if we've, we do have.
You can extend the CIP period. You can go to 7 years instead of 4 and fund a reserve that gets you a little bit of a leg up and such. We at least should have the discussions.
Yeah.
You know, and there may be items that are well qualified for reserve, a commitment of reserves.
Peter, I thought budgeted items needed to be spent. Is that right? So budgeted items by departments need to be allocated budgeted items needed to be spent by the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah, the budget basically resets each fiscal year,
So
so what
when
it
we
has.
talk
There's no
about-
requirement that they're expended.
And
Oh, I see. I thought it was required.
No, I mean, if the
they're not required to
department
spend
spends
each
less
line
than its
item.
budget,
They're expected to maintain the total amount that for their department
Yeah.
has been allocated. And then as we go through the year, there are over expenditures, under expenditures, and
Right.
different line items, but
I see. So when you talk about a reserve, we're talking about taking what's left, not generating new
or
income
funding it.
or funding.
awarding a high degree of importance to putting a little money away versus what might be another competing project
I
from
see.
that department.
That seems
The
prudent to
problem is,
me.
if you put money away, don't you need standards for how you're gonna allocate it? I guess we would all have to make that decision.
Oh, sure, yeah.
For
But-
example, last year at town meeting, we authorized the formation of a fire department equipment or apparatus reserve fund, and we funded it at $50,000. And the purpose of that is essentially a savings account. So that's money that doesn't disappear at the end of a fiscal year. It's not uncommon for municipalities to do that for those big ticket items that are recurring, and you try to save some so you don't have to bond for the full amount all at once.
And we actually do that currently. We have a police cruiser fund because we buy 2 cruisers one year, 1 cruiser the next year.
Yeah.
To avoid those ups and downs. And the same thing with highway equipment. We put money
Well,
aside
Ernie did it
into
too with the
that.
cemetery
Mhm.
tractor, right?
There's a cemetery tractor fund
Yeah.
as well.
So an ideal candidate, I'm not suggesting this should happen, but the tractor that maintenance wants, rather than a full bore, full cost 1 year, could have been, a portion of it could have been reserved. I'm not trying to suggest that that's what should happen, but I think there are a lot of candidates, and we should at least talk about them, just at least hold out the possibility.
Do they have to, do items have to be reserved individually, or can you have, say, a capital improvement reserve?
No, you could have an equipment reserve, or some of these items would not lend themselves to it because they're on a do or not do basis, but
Probably
some
want
of
to at
them
least
are.
make a general definition of what it is, that you're,
Yeah.
it's not just anything, but
Right,
but
like
for
a-
highway
So
equipment.
you're
but
consistent,
it's sort of-
you're consistent from item to item, instead of trying to,
But I'm wondering if we had some latitude, so if we had, let's say, an equipment fund and decided that the priorities shifted and we needed to, say, fund the radio replacements
Yeah.
over, I don't know, cruiser, that would be acceptable.
yeah, we'd build enough breadth into it
Yeah.
that it could be mobilized for a variety of purposes rather than specifically to a piece of equipment, say.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But Peter, didn't we, not a warning, but an advisement from our audit about having too many funds? So, would we have more of like a generic, like what I think
Right.
might have been alluding to as a capital improvement fund?
Mhm.
And that would go
Yeah.
towards capital improvement projects, what have we decided?
Yeah, I think to try to aggregate similar projects into one fund is probably the best way to go. In the past, there used to be, like you said, there would be maybe one fund for one specific thing, but try to make it more general. I don't think the auditors feel that we have too many. I think maybe in the past, there were some questions about that, but I think right now, we've structured it so that a fund can be used for a number of different related things for that category.
Yeah, lots of funds are messy. Auditors don't like messy.
So.
But I think the idea is if we're not convinced that an item X should be funded whole or left 5 years out and deserves more priority or less, and we say we can put some money toward it this year and relieve the improvement plan over time. But we don't think it deserves full funding at the time.
Does it
And-
make sense to think about, say, taking the tax collections and funding funds? I mean, is that feasible? So when we have extra income coming in because we've collected delinquent taxes, or is that considered going back into operating?
Yeah, the delinquent taxes have really already been accounted for because you book how much you bill.
Right.
And then the rest of it's how much has been paid and how much is owed. So there's really no additional revenue gain there. But what you would be doing is you would put in your operating budget a line item that says transfer to equipment fund.
I see.
And basically the tax money would be designated, to that fund.
Like we do for open space funding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Does the Public Works section reflect input from the Village Pedestrian Safety Group at all? I mean, I look at this and sort of think at 10K over 5 years for village safety improvements feels light to me.
I have received submittals from them. They haven't, Peter and I haven't plugged those in to here yet, no.
Yeah, that looks
We've
like a
just been
gap to
going
me.
on an annual number, but it's a good point that we've asked to project further out so that we have a sense of total project need
Right.
and in other areas of the town.
Right, and that's part of
Yeah.
that broader conversation is
Yeah.
what's the bigger picture context, and do we continue funding in one location or look at other needs?
I think Lee and Peter's willingness to keep these, to keep a healthy interaction of these two, budget and CIP, is really rewarding to us. I mean, I really appreciate that effort. I know it's an extra effort, but I think that's worthwhile.
Can I ask, so in terms of process, as we begin to move into the budget season, we're just going to start to order our priorities and put dollar amounts on specific items?
Yeah, one of the first things we're going to do, we call it a nut, is list out, and Lee, I'm sure, will circulate something to this effect before long. What are the unavoidable increases that we face in this coming budget that have to be obligations that are obliged, but for one reason or another, but are additional expenses over last year, they're going to have to be budgeted. And that starts to give us an idea of how much room there is for any type of increase and some way of putting a gauge on what seems to be an acceptable early percentage increase that then helps structure the process from there on. So the next step would be to say, what are additional expenses that we will budget for in 2021 that over 1920, and which are they, and do we have a pretty good handle, feel pretty comfortable about that? Then not too long after that comes an estimate of grand list. So we get some kind of a handle on revenue, and we end up with, what would you say, late November, with the basis from coming to some recommendation to Lee and Peter about what's an acceptable increase in tax rate, not expenses, in tax rate. And then you go into the December departmental presentations, and you then enter a world of a lot of detail. And
Right.
So we don't need to approve this tonight, right? There's
No,
still some
correct.
moving parts in here, and
Yeah.
we'll have the ability to move some of the timing around?
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the innovation that Lee and Peter are willing to support, which again, is great credit to them. So that we're not dealing with a fixed instrument here. We're dealing with something that will reflect budget. Budget will reflect this.
We'll look at it together.
Right, we'll
Yeah.
be looking at it
Yeah,
as an
all the way
integrated
through.
whole.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Any
But I
discussion?
just think for the next step, it would be helpful for Lee and I to know what projects do you think should be taken out, what ones should be put in, and as Jamie mentioned, what about the timing?
Yeah, I
Move
mean-
things around. So that would be helpful for us to
Yeah, we should
come to a
commit to the
final
next,
version.
by the next meeting, to let you know what we think should be added. We should conclude at the next meeting, what's our list of stuff?
That would be helpful.
Yeah, and we can all communicate that to Lee and yourself, and the ED, I think, is an obvious one. I'm sure others would comment the same way. Thank you, it's a
Yeah,
lot.
how does that work with head count additions? Is that considered capital?
Not
Personnel? No.
Not typically, that would be more operational.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
unless we were buying a car for that person or something,
Right.
which I'm not suggesting.
But there should be a categorical treatment of potential projects, capital investments, which in the way of some type of town financing, the creation of some financing asset could be.
So is the ED line item in your mind, headcount, we don't have to get into the discussion now, but for purposes of this, are you thinking
When we come
headcount, or
to
are you
the nut,
thinking?
when we
okay.
come to the nut, it would certainly be, there are two compelling cases here, one of which is Paul's, which he makes pretty regularly. But that, to me, would show up in the nut immediately, that we think there should be X amount reckoned to, directed to an economic development staffing of some kind, whether full-time or full-time equivalent or whatever.
It does list employee under equipment. I don't know if we treat employees as equipment, but.
Where is that?
That's in the equipment, additional truck and employee for highway department.
Yeah.
That's more just justifying why the
Yeah,
additional
no,
truck.
I understand, yeah. But I mean, I'm just saying, if we are considering economic development as a employee-type position.
So Joe, I have a question about the idea of a personnel for economic development. Not that I don't think that it's necessary, but are we at that point where we would put that in, like that would be, like a priority in the next year or two? Because
Probably.
I was like, I didn't know we were at that point, that
Well, I
we
think
had described what that role was.
Yeah, I'd like to at least
Yeah, I
explore
mean, I
that
think we'll.
and get a sense of what that actually would look like, or how we could consider it, or how we could implement it. We talking a full position, part-time, or are we
Yep.
talking, reassigning? I mean, is it, I thought of it as like a feasibility
Okay.
analysis. yeah.
Okay.
But that could have budget implications for
Right.
as soon as next budget cycle.
You think
Yeah.
next
Right.
budget cycle?
We have, for instance, a collective bargaining agreement that will take place at the start of the fiscal year.
Yep.
We're not giving anything away by suggesting that it likely will mean an increase over this year in SPD costs. So we can, I think if we identify where we see inevitable, inarguable, definite increases, that we should pull those out.
Yeah.
And,
Easy stuff.
keep those, and be content that we pretty well think we've identified those, so we're not surprised later. We have a fire rescue. We have quite a number that are, that's, and I think we'll be surprised when we add that number up, what it means in terms of tax rate increase just on their own. Remember last year, it was something like 2.8 out of the 3.4. I mean, just
Right.
for starters,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
It's expensive to run a town.
yeah. No, I think, Colleen, that discussion is yet to be,
Okay. I was
Yeah.
wondering if I missed something.
No, no, no,
because I was
no,
like, I
no.
don't know if we've
we just want to be sure it's on the
said
list.
we
that's
want
all.
20 hours of a
Yeah.
person to do X, Y, and Z. I didn't know we had
Yeah.
described that yet.
No,
Okay.
I think Mike and I need to put a proposal forward for
Yep.
the board's consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a few more questions?
No, I'm good.
Any further discussion?
No, I think we've,
Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Mike
Second.
moves,
Second.
Jamie seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, all of you, for